I invite the member for North Vancouver Seymour to lead the House in prayer or reflection.
In commemoration of the Battle of Atlantic, which was recognized yesterday, I will give the House the naval prayer. O eternal Lord God, who alone spreadest out the heavens and rulest the ragings of the seas, who has compassed the waters which bounds until day and night come to an end, be pleased to receive into thy almighty and most gracious protection the persons of us thy servants and the fleet in which we serve. Preserve us from the dangers of the sea and the violence of the enemy, that we may be a safeguard unto our most gracious sovereign, King Charles, and his dominions, and the security for such as passed upon the seas upon their lawful occasions, that the inhabitants of our country may in peace and quietness serve thee, our God, and that we may return in safety to enjoy the blessings of the land with the fruits of our labors, and with the thankful remembrance of thy mercies to praise and glorify thy holy name. Amen.
Introduction by members. Mr. Clerk. Member from Maple Ridge East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning, I would like to introduce my family to the House. In the gallery is my wife, Penny, and my son, Lawson, and his wife, Sarah. Please join me in welcoming them to the Legislature.
Mr. Clerk.
Introduction of bills. Private member's time.
Member for North Vancouver Seymour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over the past 40 years, I have attended the Battle of Atlantic service pretty much every year, with the exception of when I was living overseas, and even then we stopped that day and acknowledged. So I'm going to speak a little bit about the Battle of Atlantic, which is very important to the sailors of our nation and was recognized in services across the country yesterday, including a large one in Victoria at the Cenotaph outside of the Legislature, and also at Sailors Point in Vancouver. The Battle of Atlantic, which lasted 2,075 days, was the largest campaign of the Second World War. It pitted Allied navies against German and Italian naval forces, particularly submarines, in a battle to safeguard the essential flow of shipping between North America and Europe. On any given day, 125 merchant vessels were sailing in convoy across the North Atlantic. It was during these treacherous, stormy crossings that Canada's Navy matured and won the mantle of a professional service. Our Navy escorted 25,343 merchant vessels across the Atlantic. These ships carried 181,643,180 tons of cargo to Europe, the equivalent of 11 lines of freight cars, each stretching from Vancouver to Halifax. Without these supplies, the war effort would have collapsed. Although it was largely unprepared for war in 1939, Canada's Navy grew at an unparalleled rate, eventually providing 47% of all convoy escorts. Rear Admiral Murray, the Commander-in-Chief of Northwest Atlantic, who directed battles from Halifax, would become the only Canadian to hold an Allied theatre command during the Second World War. By 1945, the Royal Canadian Navy comprised 378 fighting ships and 95,000 uniformed men and women. It had suffered 2,210 fatalities, including 6 women, and had lost 24 warships. It had destroyed or shared in the destruction of 33 U-boats and 42 enemy surface craft. In partnership with Canada's Maritime Air Forces and Merchant Navy, it had played a pivotal and successful role in the contest for seaward supremacy. Each year on the first Sunday in May, Canada's naval community commemorates those lost at sea during the Second World War, and and they uphold the legacy of the Battle of the Atlantic by pledging themselves ready, ready, to face today's security challenges with pride and professionalism. The number of the ships that we lost were 24 Canadian ships, included warships, surface support ships, and motor torpedo boats. We also lost Canadian merchant ships, and we now recognize and celebrate the merchant marine, which we didn't do for a long time. We now recognize and celebrate the work that they did in this effort, because over 1,700 merchant Navy personnel lost their lives due to enemy action, which includes Canadian seamen who were lost while serving aboard 278 Canadian and Allied ships of the merchant marine. Of the 70 Canadian merchant ships were sunk, mostly in the Battle of Atlantic. Also, the Air Force was very much involved in this effort, and there were approximately 350 aircraft lost and more than 900 aircrew killed during the Battle of Atlantic. They will not be forgotten, and we will not allow it to be forgotten. For when we go to the Battle of Atlantic service, and it is a service, it has prayers, it has psalms, it has songs and hymns. The thing that we finish with is the prayer of dedication, which you are familiar with probably from Remembrance Day, and it's the same prayer. They shall not grow old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemned. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Member. Recognizing the member for Surrey Cloverdale.
Thank you very much. Nice to see you back in the chair, Honourable Speaker. Before I begin, I just wanted to send an acknowledgement to my own family, who were there for me over, well, certainly throughout my entire career, not only in politics, but all of my working life. But this was a tough last week in light of the tragedy in Vancouver, and especially to my spouse, Melissa. I love you, and I want to thank you. And just as a warning to anyone, I will be talking about the mental health care system in BC and some of the tragedies that have taken place over the last weeks and months. So I do thank you, Honourable Chair, for this opportunity to address critical gaps in British Columbia's mental health care system. Tragic events of recent weeks and months, such as the Lapu Lapu Day Festival mass murder and the violent severing of a man's hand and the killing of another man in Vancouver, as well as the attack on a woman on the seawall, have exposed systemic weaknesses that demand urgent attention. These incidents, linked to individuals with documented mental health struggles, underscore the province's failure to adequately support and intervene before crises escalate into violence. Today, I'd like to outline in this short time gaps in access, intervention, and oversight with our mental health care system and call for actionable reform. I want to be clear that most people living with mental illness are not violent. They're not entangled with the criminal justice system, and they do not pose a risk to public safety. However, British Columbia's mental health care system, both inside the forensic psychiatric system and outside of it, are chronically underfunded, overstretched, and leave many individuals without timely or effective support, leaves them at risk of deterioration, and in some cases, particularly for people deemed by the courts to be unfit to stand trial, but not in custody, they risk further serious incidents. The Canadian Mental Health Association of BC Division has highlighted a real fear of reactionary policies following the Lapu Lapu tragedy. Current wait times for psychiatric care can stretch for months, and rural communities often lack local services, forcing individuals to navigate the crisis alone or to rely on emergency rooms for mental health needs. The system fails in proactive intervention, particularly for those with severe mental illness. In September of 2024, a man with over 60 police contacts described as mentally ill and on probation severed a man's hand and killed another in Vancouver. Despite the known risks, he was released with light probation conditions. These real gaps in critical services are what can lead to individuals slipping through the cracks due to inadequate monitoring and ineffective support. Oversight and coordination between mental health services, police, and community supports are often inadequate. The seawall attack on a woman in Vancouver further illustrates this. Details about the perpetrator's mental health emerged in the media, pointing to a mental health crisis unfolding in the first instance of police contact, with the accused man having a history of crises, off medication, and causing concern in his residence. Yet the man was not apprehended under the Mental Health Act, and no assessment took place, not until the man was released and then later smashed the face of a tourist. That action to address his mental health was then taken only after that serious incident occurred. Unfortunately, this is a familiar pattern of unchecked mental health crises contributing to public safety risks. And in the case of what happened in Vancouver at the Lapu Lapu Festival, police had prior contact with the man accused the day before the attack. The media reports that family members reached out for help only hours before the attack. Potential for lack of integration leaves dangerous gaps where warning signs are missed or unfortunately dismissed. Municipalities are calling for stronger supports, but without a system-wide review, the ongoing piecemeal approach by the government, this province risks increasing the fragmentation of the care system because the Mental Health Act is only one aspect of our current system. The province's review of the Mental Health Act announced by the Premier should be done as part of a full systems review or inquiry. Without a review of the system in its entirety, inside our forensic system and outside of it, looking at services that apply under the Mental Health Act and those that are provided outside the criteria of the Act. If we do not review the entire system, how best will we know how to change it? And if changes are made, they must address gaps in the system before tragedy strikes. British Columbians deserve a mental health care system that protects both vulnerable and the public. Let's honor the victims by building a system that prevents such tragedies. I thank members on both sides of this House for their continued attention on mental health and safety in British Columbia. Thank you.
Thank you, member. Recognizing the member for Victoria Swan Lake.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. May is Jewish Heritage Month, a time to celebrate the role that Jewish Canadians have played and continue to play in communities across Canada. British Columbia is home to approximately 40,000 Jewish people, the third largest Jewish community in Canada. Its members live across the province, including in Vancouver, the North Shore, Fraser Valley, Kelowna, Nanaimo, and here in Victoria, the fastest growing Jewish community in Canada. The first Jews arrived in BC in 1858 from the US, and by the following year, there were enough people to host high holiday services on Johnson Street. Many set up businesses to support those stopping by Victoria before trying to find fortune in BC's interior during the Cariboo Gold Rush. The imprints of BC's history, Jewish history, on our capital remain. If you walk no more than 20 minutes from the Legislature, you'll find the oldest continuously operating synagogue west of the Mississippi River, Temple Emmanuel. Jews started to migrate from Victoria to Vancouver as the cities of the Lower Mainland grew. Many settled in the Strathcona neighborhood alongside BC's Chinese, Japanese, and Black Canadian communities. The original building for Congregation Sheretz Tzedek still stands today on Melville Street. By the late 1800s and 1900s, diasporas from Eastern Europe started to move to Canada to escape persecution in hopes of a better life. The different waves of Jewish migration to the province are reflective of Canada's rich tapestry of immigration. In our more than 160-year history, we have also seen waves of migrations from diasporas in Latin America, South Africa, the former Soviet Union, and Israel. In fact, 36% of BC's Jewish community was born outside of the country, making it the most diverse Jewish diaspora in all of Canada. Jewish British Columbians have flourished in the arts, sciences, academia, philanthropy, and civic life. As an elected leader, I'd like to reflect on their political contributions. Canada's first Jewish MP was Henry Nathan Jr., who was elected to represent Victoria in 1871. Vancouver's second mayor, David Oppenheimer, was foundational to building the city. Embodying the value of tikkun olam, which is a central concept in Judaism, which means to repair and improve the world, Jewish community members have contributed immensely to social activism and changes in our province. Dave Barrett, our first Jewish premier, advocated for increases to the minimum wage, and Jewish ministers in his cabinet, such as Norm Levy, introduced changes to our healthcare and foster care systems. The history of social activism comes from being treated like the other. Like many diverse groups in BC, Jews face discrimination, including through university quotas and land covenants. Unfortunately, anti-Semitism still persists today. According to a recent survey from Jewish Federation of Greater Vancouver, 62% of respondents reported experiencing at least one anti-Semitic incident. This is why we must continue our commitment to combating hate in the hopes of creating a fairer and safer society for all. As I reflect on this history and future and the resilience of the Jewish community, I'd like to share one final story. In 1994, survivors of the Holocaust settled in BC and formed the Vancouver Holocaust Education Centre. I had the privilege to work alongside these pillars of the community to help tell their stories and educate about human rights, social justice, and genocide awareness. Its members quietly and persistently advocated with provincial governments to ensure that teaching and learning about the Holocaust would be enduring opportunities for BC students as a legacy for future generations. I'm heartened that their dream will become a reality this fall when our province introduces mandatory Holocaust education as part of the Social Studies 10 curriculum. This is the story of BC's Jewish community, responding to adversity with resilience and taking these lessons to advocate for others who do not have a voice. This Jewish Heritage Month, I encourage you to learn, celebrate, and embrace the Jewish community. Toda Rabah. Thank you, Honourable Speaker.
Thank you, member. Recognizing the member for Kelowna Centre.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Today I rise to speak about one of the most cherished institutions in the Central Okanagan, Starbrite Children's Development Centre. And I do so with both deep admiration and growing concern. For over 60 years, Starbrite has been a beacon of hope for families with children who have developmental needs. But now that beacon is at risk of being extinguished. Before I get into the numbers, the policies, and the funding decisions, I want to talk about what Starbrite really is at its core. It's a place where parents can walk in feeling overwhelmed, uncertain, even afraid, and they are met with kindness, expertise, and a plan. It's a place where children, some of them unable to walk, speak, or engage with the world around them, are given the tools, therapies, and encouragement they need to reach their potential. It's a place where families are not just supported, they are empowered. About 5 years ago, a mama walked into Starbrite with a son who wasn't crawling properly and was dragging one leg. With the help of Starbrite, she was able to access services, practice special exercises, gain emotional support, and ultimately her son walks just fine today. 25 years ago, a concerned mama walked in with her nonverbal son knowing that something just wasn't right. She was supported by Starbrite and their team, and now her son is a productive 30-year-old man. And she loves Starbrite so much that she's a happy, long-time employee. Starbrite currently serves approximately 1,000 children each year from birth to school age, offering a broad range of services tailored to each child's individual development. These are children with speech delays, motor coordination challenges, physical disabilities, cognitive delays, and complex needs that require collaborative interdisciplinary care. The team of 60 employees, all union members of the Health Sciences Associations, includes speech and language pathologists, occupational therapists, physiotherapists, infant development consultants, behavioral analysts, and clinical counselors, as well as family service coordinators who work directly with caregivers to help them navigate services, access resources, and probably most importantly, feel less alone. Interestingly, they do this all under one roof with a team-based approach that ensures no child slips through the cracks. It's worth noting that this facility includes multiple rooms for various therapies, 2 buildings, outdoor spaces, and an outdoor playground. It's also worth noting that the staff is incredibly dedicated, and many employees can boast tenures that span multiple decades. You cannot put a price on that, and there's no guarantee that we will build this kind of camaraderie in the group, again, with the next model. This model works. It changes outcomes. The evidence is overwhelming. Early intervention is one of the best investments we can make in a child's future. For children with developmental challenges, those early years are critical, the window of opportunity where support has the greatest impact. Starbrite delivers the support in a setting where families feel safe, heard, and respected. Their programs are trauma-informed, culturally inclusive, and rooted in best practices. They don't just meet the standards, they set them. But despite decades of exceptional service, the future of Starbrite remains deeply uncertain. In 2023, the Ministry of Children and Family Development announced a shift towards a new model of care, the Family Connection Centre. While the stated goal was to streamline services, the practical effort in our region was the removal of funding from Starbrite, an organization with an unmatched track record and community trust. The response was swift and emotional. Over 3,300 people signed a petition to save Starbrite. Families rallied outside the centre. Healthcare professionals, educators, city councillors, even the mayor, all raised their voices in support. That public pressure led to a series of temporary contract extensions. As it stands now, Starbrite's contract is set to expire in December of 2025 this year. With this looming expiration date casting a shadow over hundreds of families, Starbrite simply needs to know, will they continue to be part of the service delivery system for children under school age going forward? That clarity is not only reasonable, it's long overdue. We already have a system in place that delivers exceptional outcomes, so why dismantle it? If Starbrite is forced to close, the consequences will be devastating. Families will lose access to trusted clinicians, waitlists will grow. Children will miss critical early intervention windows, and new untested systems will be forced to rebuild the trust that Starbrite has earned over decades. We are not talking about numbers on a spreadsheet. We are talking about real children with real needs whose futures depend on consistent, specialized, and compassionate care. Starbrite isn't just a provider of services, it's a partner in the lives of families. It's a safe place, a trusted place, a necessary place. So today I'm calling on this government to do the right thing and renew Starbrite's funding, not just temporarily, but with long-term commitment to this organization and the commitment the families deserve. Starbrite is a model worth preserving. Let's not make the mistake of learning its value only after it's gone. Thank you.
Thank you, member. Recognizing the member for Vancouver Strathcona.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today I rise to speak in support of my friends and colleagues, Parliamentary Secretary and a Minister for celebrating Red Dress Day and their statements. I'd like to speak about the colonial systems on a more personal level and on the resulting violence that Indigenous peoples live with every day. The missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and LGBTQ+ communities are injustices and tragedies, but they continue to this day. It's terrible, it's horrific, but it doesn't exist in isolation. Growing up under a colonial system is very personal, and I'm not sure people always realize just how oppressive it is. Though we exist on Indigenous lands, much of which is unceded, Indigenous peoples do not own the reserve. Reserves are held by His Majesty, which was set aside for the use and benefit of the nations that have held that territory since time immemorial. We can't cut down trees, we can't dig out gravel on our own properties without a permit, which takes about 3 months. And because timber and aggregates resources are owned by the band, we don't economically benefit from their sale. 50% goes to the band and 50% goes to the landholder. So we need to seek permission from His Majesty's representative to do anything on the reserve. Colonialism is violent. This violence starts with our dehumanization. and has long-lasting implications on the Indigenous peoples' health outcomes, rates of poverty, and access to services. The dehumanization of Indigenous peoples empowers others to engage in physical and emotional violence against us. For instance, stating that sovereignty is somehow a threat to Canadian unity is both untrue and quite frankly racist. These kinds of blanket statements are not okay and should not be received as if they are. I'd like to perhaps educate some of the members that the jurisdictional differences between the provincial and federal government. Indigenous peoples are governed through the Indian Act, which is federal law and came into existence in April of 1876. Now, Indigenous peoples do have sovereignty over our traditional territories. And it also, the city of Vancouver defined unceded as lands that were never legally ceded or given up to the Crown through a treaty or any other agreement. It wasn't given away, it wasn't abandoned, it was stolen through colonial violence, oppression, and genocide. Moving to the suggestion that sovereignty is somehow an obstacle to British Columbia, quite frankly, our economies are interdependent. Where do we spend our money? And I've said it before and I'll say it again, when we do well, we all do well. Indigenous communities across this province have been honest and active partners with the province of British Columbia on a variety of critical projects. We have and will continue to work with Indigenous communities across this province because it's the right thing to do. And it just so happens that we all benefit from the relationship. So thank you, Honourable Speaker. Aishkasiyam.
Thank you, member. Recognizing the member for Surrey Panorama.
Madam Speaker, after a hard-fought federal election, the results are in. With the outcome mixed nationally, one thing is absolutely clear here in British Columbia. Voters across our province sent a powerful message. British Columbians want public safety, affordability, opportunity, and prosperity for hardworking people. Families are struggling under the weight of high taxes, skyrocketing costs, and government decisions that seem increasingly out of touch with everyday realities. The strong showing for Conservatives across British Columbia reflects a clear rejection of the status quo and desires for leadership grounded in common sense, individual responsibility, and practical solutions. People are frustrated, and ideological politics has done more to divide than deliver results. British Columbians want a government that works for them, not against them, and that puts priorities for ordinary citizens ahead of political agendas. The results should be seen as a signal to voters are demanding change. They're calling for leaders who restore balance to our economy, who will support law enforcement and public safety, and will stop punishing success through bloated bureaucracy and out-of-control spending. The direction Canadians want is clear. They want safer streets, more affordable communities, and a government that rewards hard work instead of punishing it. They want to build homes and businesses without jumping through endless hoops. They want leaders who get things done, not more government spin. British Columbians, particularly in communities like mine, are tired of being told what to think and how to live. They want government to focus on the basics, creating jobs, building homes and infrastructure, improving healthcare, and supporting our police. This election marked a shift, one where people of this province stood up and said, enough. It's not up to all of us on both sides of it's now up to all of us on both sides of the legislature to hear the message and take it seriously. I mean all of that as a call to unity, to work together. During this time, I'd also like to congratulate the new MPs across British Columbia. Conservative candidates ran strong, principled campaigns, and many were rewarded with the trust of their communities. Please allow me, on behalf of the Conservative caucus, to extend our sincere congratulations to the new Conservative members of Parliament from British Columbia who will now carry their constituents' voices to Ottawa. We had Aaron Gunn elected in North Island of Powell River, Jeff Kibble in Cowichan and Malahat Langford, Tamara Cronus elected in Nanaimo Ladysmith, Ellis Ross in Skeena Bulkley Valley, Chalk O in Richmond Centre Marpole, and Helena Conans representing Similkameen, South Okanagan, West Kootenay. These are strong, principled, and experienced individuals who will bring credibility and accountability to Parliament. Their victories are not accidents. They were the results of speaking directly to the concerns of everyday people and offering a real alternative to the current federal direction. Their success reflects a growing appetite for common sense leadership in our province and across the country. Closer to home, I want to take a moment to recognize several exceptional candidates who campaigned hard in the Lower Mainland, people that I actually have become to know fairly well. Jesse Sahota, a former police officer like myself who ran in Delta. Harjit Singh Gill, who ran in Surrey Newton. I will say my wife did volunteer on his campaign quite a lot. It was very nice to get to know him, a member of the community. Rajveer Dalen in Surrey Centre. Suk Pander in Fleetwood Port Kells. Carrie Lynn Finley from South Surrey White Rock. And finally, Sukhman Gill, who did win and was elected in Abbotsford South Langley, and will now have the honour of representing his community in Ottawa. To all these candidates, I thank them for stepping forward. To the countless volunteers who knocked doors for every party, made phone calls, worked tirelessly to bring about change, your efforts have not gone unnoticed. You helped shape the future of this province, and I thank you deeply for your commitment to any of the causes and for your public service. While this is a victory for many of our candidates, the work is far from done. British Columbians are expecting results, and rightly so. This means putting political differences aside and working together on the issues that matter to our constituents, improving public safety, building houses, fixing healthcare, and ensuring affordability for seniors, young families, and small businesses. I will skip to the end and say, in talking to my new friends on the other side, I think we all in this House are ready to work together and make this happen. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Member. Honourable members, according to the order paper, we will look to the member for Richmond Centre to move second reading of Bill number M211, Zero Emission Vehicles Repeal Act. Member.
Thank you, Speaker. I move the Bill M211, Zero Emission Vehicle Repeal Act be now read a second time. Honourable Speaker, today I rise to call for the repeal of the Zero Emission Vehicle Mandate Act. Legislature that, while well-intentioned, but failed to account for the economic, geographic, and infrastructural realities of British Columbians. Let me begin by stating it very clearly. This is not an anti-EV bill. I'm a proud EV owner. I've driven multiple electric vehicles for almost a decade. I understand their value, their benefits, also their limitations. But what I need to also understand is that EVs are not for everyone. And government mandates that try to force a one-size-fits-all solutions will only create frustration, inequality, and worse, an energy and infrastructure crisis we're not ready to face. Let's start with the most urgent issue, electricity supply. BC Hydro has publicly warned us we're heading towards electricity shortages. Demand is growing rapidly. EVs, heat pumps, new housing projects, our clean energy grid is being stretched thin. In fact, BC Hydro recently issued a call for electricity campaign because we do not have enough self-sufficient power. If we cannot guarantee a stable, reliable, and sufficient supply of electricity, how can we responsibly mandate that 90% of cars sold in this province must be electric in just 5 years' time, and 100% by 2035? Even worse, this government added a $500,000 fine and up to 6 months of jail time for just selling a gas-powered car. I can't imagine how that became this government's priority. A mandate without capacity is not just irresponsible, it's dangerous. It places unnecessary pressure on our grid and risks blackouts, power rationing, or increased reliance on electricity imports from the US, especially during extreme weather time. And now let's talk about geography. Because EVs might work well in downtown Vancouver or in Richmond Centre like in my riding, or Victoria, but how about Fort St. John? How about Castigar, Terrace, Prince George? In rural and northern BC, EVs are simply not a practical option for many residents. Longer distance travel is a necessity, winters are harsh, the terrain is mountainous, range anxiety isn't just a buzzword here, it's a daily lived concern. If you run out of electricity in the middle of nowhere during a snowstorm, it's not just inconvenient, it's incredibly stressful, in some cases could be life-threatening. We need to consider the diverse need of the public, especially small businesses, farmers, and also those in the rural area who rely on vehicles that can tow. It's worth highlighting that the cheapest electric pickup truck in BC costs over $70,000. And in real-world condition, it can only deliver about 350 kilometers of range without any towing. Currently, only the most expensive electric pickups, priced at over $120,000 before tax, might be able to tow a load and make it across the Coquihalla Highway into the BC interior. In contrast, a $40,000 gas pickup can handle that same trip without any issue. So why is this minister ignoring the real-world needs of British Columbians? And let's not forget, there's limited access to EV repair shops or replacement parts in suburban and rural communities. If something goes wrong, there's no easy fix. This mandate disregards the lived experience of people outside the urban centers. Then there's consumer behaviors, something that this government has consistently failed to understand. Surveys repeatedly show the same barrier to EV adoption: higher upfront costs, concern about the battery degradation, limited resale value, longer charging times, and lack of charging access for apartments or strata residents. As the ministry own report shows just last week, EV sales have already slowed down, and in fact dropped it for the first time in 2024 compared to 2023. And that while both provincial and federal EV incentives were still in place. Now, with those incentives ending, affordability will drop even further, and so will sales. It's just simple as that. In fact, the president and CEO of the Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association stated, quote, "Given ongoing affordability challenges, lack of charging infrastructure, and other market forces, the province will not come close to the mandate target for 2030, end quote. And the president and CEO of the Canadian Automobile Dealers Association said, quote, "Any EV regulations must align consumers' demand, adequate charging infrastructure, and purchase incentives in order to be successful. None of those currently exceeds at the level required to support the numbers contemplated by the EV mandates," end quote. And what about the president and CEO of the Global Automakers of Canada? Quote, "We have new evidence that suggests the government's set EV sales target will not be achieved," end quote. And here in BC, the New Car Dealers Association of BC has also urged the government to be realistic and take a closer look at what's actually happening in the market and with consumers. So let's be realistic. Many British Columbians are already struggling to pay for groceries, rent, and heating. And now we're telling them that you must buy an EV, whether it fits their needs or not. It's not policy, it's forcing compliance. What we're doing here is distorting our local supply and pricing by creating an artificial demand that manufacturers may not be able to meet affordably. And that means delay, higher costs, and fewer options for consumers. That's not progress, that's just pain. Let's look at the charging infrastructure. Yes, more charging stations are on the way, but they're not coming fast enough, and not in the places they're most needed. The urban center and the urban-rural divide is glaring. And even in the urban area, many older condominiums simply do not have the electrical capacity to install chargers. And for those that do, the cost of wiring and installing new chargers can be enormous. Many condo owners, like me, are already facing sky-high strata fees and rising insurance costs. How does the minister expect these strata corporations to magically come up with the money to make this upgrade within the next 10 years? And I would also want to point out that some public chargers are price gouging EV users by charging 2 to 5 times the cost of electricity. This effectively eliminates the fuel cost saving for EV owners, defeating the point of low-cost travel. It's not just about putting a point of low cost, it's not just about putting a charger in every parking lot. It's about ensuring access is fair, reliable, and affordable. And we're not anywhere close to that yet. So, Honorable Speaker, we're not ready. We're not ready in terms of power. We're not ready in terms of infrastructure. We're not ready in terms of affordability. We're not ready in terms of technology. And yet, this mandate pretends we are. Lastly, let's talk about safety. While EVs are 50 to 60 times less likely to catch fire compared to ICE, internal combustion engine vehicles, but when they do ignite, as many happened in many parts of the world, it takes weeks or even more than a month to fully extinguish. Does every jurisdiction in our province have a comprehensive plan for dealing with EV fires in underground parkings, condos, campgrounds, or even on BC ferries? So where do we go from there? We don't go backward, but we do go smarter. We repeal the mandate. We allow British Columbians to make informed, personal choice. We stop dictating what kind of vehicles they must buy, and start creating a market where they want to buy clean vehicles because it makes sense for their lifestyle and their budget. We invest in our infrastructure first. We strengthen our grid. We ensure EV technologies is viable for all regions across BC, not just in Metro Vancouver or in Victoria. Because here's the truth, Honorable Speaker. A true leadership is that when we set a goal, we must set one that is ambitious but achievable, not unrealistic and unreachable. British Columbians deserve better than ideological mandates. They deserve a government that respects their realities and choices. So let's repeal the Zero Emission Vehicle Mandate Act, get BC back on the road to practical, affordable, and sustainable progress. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Thank you, Member. Recognizing the member for Surrey City Centre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and welcome back. I'm delighted to see you back on the chair. And before I begin, I just want to commend you for your leadership and your care that you've provided, not just to the Filipino community, but our community at large. So I thank you for that. I rise today to speak to the proposal to repeal the Zero Emissions Vehicles Act, an act that has been critical to the progress British Columbia has made in building a cleaner, more sustainable future for all British Columbians. The Zero Emissions Vehicles Act is a framework that has enabled real results. In 2024, BC had the second highest electric vehicle adoption rate in Canada, with 22.4% of new vehicle sales being zero-emission vehicles. Nearly 195,000 ZEVs, or zero-emission vehicles, are now registered in BC, a massive leap from just the 5,000 we had 8 years ago. And this momentum isn't confined to the Lower Mainland. We're seeing the EV revolution across every corner of our province. Over 5% of light-duty vehicle sales in northern BC, 11% in the Kootenays and Thompson Okanagan, 22% on Vancouver Island, and 26% in the Lower Mainland. British Columbians are choosing EVs, and the Zero Emissions Vehicles Act ensures those vehicles are available to meet that growing demand. Repealing the act would undermine that progress. It would mean fewer EVs on lots, longer wait times, and fewer affordable options, especially for lower and middle income families looking to make a greener choice. This proposed repeal is an attack on evidence-based climate action and on the efforts of a government which has been leading the way in terms of climate-friendly initiatives. And it's important to remember that we're uniquely positioned to support this transition to emission-free vehicles. Why? Because we have a clean, reliable hydroelectric system right here in BC, which is capable of powering our growing electricity demands without turning to fossil fuels. While the official opposition clings to outdated and unworkable alternatives, our government has taken decisive steps to modernize and expand clean energy. In fact, for the first time in 2 decades, BC electricity demand is projected to increase by more than 15% by 2030, driven by population growth, new housing, industrial development, and a shift from fossil fuels to clean electricity. And to meet that demand, BC Hydro is making historic investments, and this includes the completion of Site C Dam, adding power for 500,000 homes, 10 renewable energy projects through our 2024 call for power, adding another 500,000 homes worth of supply, and energy investments, energy efficiency investments that will save enough power to serve over 200,000 additional homes. Now together, that's energy for over 1 million additional homes. And we're not stopping there. BC Hydro's updated 10-year capital plan includes $36 billion in infrastructure investments, and that is a 50% increase over the previous plan. We're upgrading substations, building new transmission lines, and supporting electrification in high-growth communities, all while ensuring that rate increases remain below cumulative inflation. Madam Speaker, this is climate leadership with a plan and not a slogan. Now contrast that with the actions, or rather inactions, of the official opposition. They've opposed nearly every major climate initiative that we've brought forward. They've opposed our update to the Clean Energy Act, which sets a bold new target of 100% clean electricity by 2030. They opposed carbon pricing on industrial emissions, and this is a policy that has been supported by everyone from the Mining Association of BC to the David Suzuki Foundation. But yet, we're supposed to believe that their view and their approach is common sense. Nothing to do with common sense. They even want to repeal the Greenhouse Gas Industrial Reporting and Control Act, which would risk disinvestment, stranded assets, jeopardize our competitiveness in global markets. And Madam Speaker, it's worth noting the alarming stance of the Conservative Party of BC and their leader on climate change. The opposition leader has actually taken us on a wild ride, first doubting the effects of climate change, saying it's just a theory, it's not an existential threat, he says. Then came the election campaign, and his words changed, with him acknowledging that climate change is real, but actually that was a play on words, because he flatly denies the scientific consensus that human activity, particularly carbon emissions, is the primary driver. He dismisses climate action as a doom cult, ridicules carbon reduction strategies, and rejects basic science in favor of what? A defeatist rhetoric. Let's be clear. Saying that climate change is real while denying its causes and obstructing solutions is not leadership. It is ill-informed misdirection, and it is flat-out irresponsible. And speaking of defeatist attitude, the opposition leader says that really there's nothing that we can do, nothing that we can do to prevent climate change or to work towards fighting climate change. But that's not just wrong, that's dangerous. That's a dangerous form of thinking, and British Columbians deserve real solutions grounded in science and not cynical denial wrapped in slogans. But you know what, Madam Speaker, we're not going to sit on our hands like the opposition leader would like to do. We know that industrial carbon pricing is fundamental to decarbonization efforts. The BC output-based pricing system provides a cost-effective and fair mechanism to reduce emission. And let's talk about fuels. Our low-carbon fuel standard, one of the most successful climate policies in the province, has already achieved significant reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. Methane regulations, again, we're leading. BC has set an ambitious target reducing methane emissions from oil and gas operations by 75% by 2030. But this was achieved through collaboration, through optimism, through hope, with academia, industry, and environmental groups alike. As a result, our oil and gas sector has now one of the lowest methane intensities in North America. Yet the opposition wants to roll that back too. Madam Speaker, this bill isn't about consumer choice. It is about the opposition turning its back on science and economic opportunity. We're building a province where clean energy powers industry, homes, and vehicles. And we've helped 30 communities adopt the BC Energy Step Code and 29 adopt the Zero Carbon Step Code, standards that lower emissions and reduce energy bills. We're investing $50 million in heat pump rebates. We're building the infrastructure to support a zero-emission transportation future. Over 7,000 charging stations now span the province, which is up from just 781 back in 2016. At a time when global uncertainty is rising and energy choices are under scrutiny, BC is standing firm. We're scaling up renewable projects, cutting red tape, and forging a path forward towards a more resilient, low-carbon economy. And British Columbians understand what's at stake. They're making the greener choice as we speak. They have been doing that for the last few years. And our job is to make sure that choice is available, affordable, and supported by the infrastructure and policies that are needed to back it up. There's a vision, Madam Speaker, and that vision needs to be exemplary, not just for the rest of this country, but for the rest of the world. So I have a message for those who are proposing to repeal the Zero Emissions Vehicles Act. You're not just rolling back law, you're rolling back progress, and you're telling industry, you're telling families and future generations that BC is walking away from climate leadership. That is not common sense, but we on this side of the House, we're not going to let that happen. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, member. Recognizing the leader of the third party.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I also want to extend my gratitude for your work over the last nine days. I know it's very much appreciated by all of us here. I want to thank the member for Surrey City Centre for rolling out all the statistics that clearly tell the picture that this transition is happening. This transition will happen. I'm not a big fan of the rhetorical, how do you sleep at night, but I am really trying to sit here and question how we tell our children and grandchildren that we thought about taking this giant step backward in climate action. I'm also trying to imagine a member standing up at the beginning of the 19th century and saying, I like the horse and buggy, I'm not sure, I don't really think that we can build the infrastructure required for the newfound automobile, and I think we should just stick with what we've got and be happy with that. So I don't know whether this is denial of climate change or just let's stick our heads in the sand and hope that somebody else will take care of it, but we are the people who need to take care of it. That's leadership. I'm not pretending that the electric vehicle is the silver bullet. We probably, we can't all afford to roll around in private vehicles. We need to build out transit. But I want to push back on two pretty important things. One of which is that we can't possibly supply enough electricity. I'm a little surprised to hear from a party that believes in building things and getting things done that we can't possibly do this. We can't supply enough electricity. Of course we can. It's just a matter of priorities. This is not a limiting factor. This is a convenient excuse. The same as, running out of battery on the highway in northern BC. Most EVs now, including the F-150 Lightning, which a lot of my constituents have purchased to replace their gas vehicles, very happy with. 500 kilometers, even in a province the size of BC, you're just as likely to run out of gas, and that creates safety problems of its own. So these are pretty thin-sounding excuses from my point of view, Madam Speaker. I will emphasize the word defeatist. It just sounds to me like we have no aspiration. We don't think we can do this. Why bother trying? And I just don't see how that's really relevant in this emergency that we're facing. Transportation emissions are up 18%. We need to set targets that we can achieve. They are achievable. We need to set targets that send the right signals and push us in the right direction. This is not a limiting of freedom. People will be able to roll around in internal combustion vehicles probably for another 50 years. They might be buying them used, which is not a huge impingement on their freedom. People are still playing LPs on record players. That's their right. They will pay a premium for that. They will be the oddity of people who just decided they didn't want to progress. They didn't want progress, and that's their right. I just, when I hear the Car Dealers Association quoted, I really want to point out that there's an extreme bias here. The amount that car dealers make from maintaining internal combustion engines, which are extremely complex, have taken 100 years to get right, and we now enjoy the fruits of that 100 years of technological innovation. But there's a lot of money to be made from maintaining vehicles. Not so much with electric vehicles, and that's the way. Those are the market forces that are at play. I don't need to go any further. It's obvious that the Green Caucus will not be supporting this. I'm disappointed that in 2025, climate science is, pretty much impossible to debate, except for those who don't want to deal with it and look it in the face. I'm disappointed that we have to look at a bill like this. We've made some progress. It's not perfect. There can be adjustments to be made, but the repeal of the entire act that has shown progress and is moving us in the way that we all know we need to go, whether we like it or not, can't be supported, and obviously be voting against. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, member. Recognizing the member for Surrey White Rock.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it is absolutely great to see you back today, and I want to thank you for everything you've done for our province and the Filipino community, especially over the last few weeks. And you were doing that work long before, but that light was really shown in the last week, so I want to thank you for that. I wasn't planning on getting up today, but I'm going to get up. I'm not going to be very long, but I'm going to be, I think, fairly direct on a couple things. Number one, on what my colleague and friend has put forward here, I think it very much is the member opposite talked about common sense. And I think this is very much about that. The fact of the matter is, what the government member got up and stated today was absolutely embarrassing for a number of reasons. And it's quite evident. The fact is this government, this MLA talks about what they're doing. The reason we're in this position is because this is a government that has sat on their hands. This MLA talks about sitting on their hands. They have sat on their hands for 8 years. 8 years and avoided doing the work that needed to be done to put us in a better position. And now they found religion in terms of supporting the projects that should already have been completed by now. We don't have the electricity because this government sat on their hands. Okay? if this is a government that wants to pretend and masquerade that it stands up for the environment, no way. Absolutely not. This is a government that can't even be transparent about their own emissions. Are you serious? And at least I'll give the MLA credit for this. She was clear. I guess she was speaking for the government that they're standing behind their targets, because the minister hasn't done that and the premier hasn't done that, because every time they've spoken, they've hedged. They've hedged because they've seen the numbers that we see. They see I hope they see the reality. The fact is, we got people that are $200 away from not being able to pay their bills. The fact is that we've got stratas in my own riding where nobody even owns an electric car that are being forced this year to make sure that they are paying for charging stations. Are you serious? Like, you know, it's, at some point, this government needs to get out and explore the province. They need to go talk to people in Fort St. John, in Dawson Creek, in Smithers, in other areas, and figure out why this isn't working. Because what was said today, I challenge them to go up there and say that in those communities. And I guarantee you, they absolutely will not. And it's a joke. Give me a break. To say that the premier cannot even get up and defend the EV targets. And that's been going on for months. The minister can't even do that. And the car industry is even saying that. And we see those numbers. Like, do they actually think that those targets can be met? And do they think that British Columbians today, to the single mom that just bought that used van to get their kids to hockey practice, by the way, which this government has now made them pay PST on, that they have to comply by this? Give me a break. You know, if they want to go back and talk about, you know, the past election, everything like that, maybe that was a bit of a wake-up call to get in reality. And I guarantee you that MLA didn't go to one doorstep and campaign on EV targets. So, anyways, I actually think that this is important, and I would love to see if these words are going to be held if these targets aren't met, or if the premier or the energy minister decide that they're going to actually be transparent about it and actually change the targets or eliminate them completely. We're in an affordability crisis, and we have been for a long time. We're in an energy crisis. And if the government wants to realize why we're in an energy crisis, they can look at the two people that sit in this room and hold either the title of Premier or the Minister of Energy and why we're in that. When you sit and you oppose things like Site C, you oppose things like TMX, you oppose things like LNG, you oppose basically anything that gives a job in the private sector, you get to be in this position. They can shake their head all they want, but that's the reality of it. Right? So, you know, at the end of the day, this legislation makes sense. And at the end of the day, I don't think there's one person, maybe a couple, maybe two, maybe three, that actually thinks this government is going to meet this target. And to stand up here and lecture on this after their record is an absolute embarrassment. So I challenge this government to actually go and give that speech that they just gave up in Prince George, up in Fort Nelson. Go give it in Comox. And you're going to get laughed out of the room, and you should, because it's an absolute joke. And so with that, Madam Speaker, I don't know how much more clear I can be. The fact is that this is a government that continues and continues to overpromise and underdeliver. And they've done it in every single metric. And a newsflash for the MLA across, they've done it on the environment side as well. And no, that's if the member wants to talk about science, that is proven out. That is science. So with that, I will be supporting my colleague's legislation that he's tabled here today because you know what? It makes sense and it's actually based in reality.
Thank you, member. Recognizing the member for Langley Abbotsford.
Honourable Speaker, I rise today in full support of the bill introduced by member from Richmond Centre, the Consumers' Choice Zero Emissions Vehicle Amendment Act 2025. This bill eliminates the heavy-handed mandate that requires 90% of all new vehicles sold in British Columbia to be zero emissions by 2030 and 100% by 2035. It also repeals the outrageous penalty and punishes any person who dares to sell gas-powered vehicles after 2035, with fines up to $500,000 and 6 months in jail. Let me be clear, Mr. Speaker, this is not a speech against electric vehicles. Many British Columbians support EVs, and so do I, but I also support freedom. I support choice. I support economic reality over heavy-handed coercion. This bill restores the basic principle. In British Columbia, in BC, we British Columbians should have the right to choose the vehicle that works for us, not one dictated by the government. Let us talk about the realities on the ground. In Langley, there are over 33,000 vehicles insured. In Abbotsford, over 30,000. Together, these communities have more than 8,000 Ford F-150 pickups on the road. These are not luxury vehicles. These are work trucks. These are the lifeblood of tradesmen, farmers, and contractors and families. Yet in 2023, there were only 92 Ford Lightning EVs trucks sold in Langley, 66 in Abbotsford. That's just 158 pickups in two major communities, compared to more than 8,000 internal combustion pickups. Less than 2%. That is not a market trend. That is a reality check. British Columbians are not rejecting EVs. They're rejecting them being forced into them. The truth is that EVs still don't meet any of the many hardworking people in rural communities like northern areas. Range anxiety is real. Charging infrastructure is limited. Winters are long and harsh. A dead battery isn't an inconvenience, it's dangerous. Now let's look at Edison Motors, a local BC company, building North America's first electric hybrid semi-truck. You would think this government would celebrate that innovation. You would think they'd support it. Instead, they were denied clean tech grant funding by this province. Then shockingly, the same private firm the NDP chose to run the program approached Edison Motors and offered them grant writing help for 20% of the cut if successful. Edison's co-founder, Chase Barber, called it a shakedown. A BC-based startup trying to electrify the heaviest emitters in our transportation sector was not met with support, but with gatekeeping and conflict of interest. This government says it wants to fight climate change. But when BC innovators show up with practical, working-class solutions, they are denied the support in favor of politically connected green energy mega projects. Let's talk about EV sales across the country. In 2024, Quebec had a record year, but since the start of 2025, EV sales have dropped over 40%. The senior vice president of the Montreal Electrical Vehicle Show said, I quote, "Let's be realistic, the market has been chaotic since the beginning of the year." Unquote. Why? Because the Quebec government suspended and reduced its EV rebates. The $7,000 incentive is now $4,000. It will drop to $2,000 in 2026 and will be eliminated by 2027. And in January, the federal government canceled its $5,000 rebate, catching many consumers off guard. Once the subsidies certainly are subtracted from the equation, for many people, these vehicles are out of reach. So what's happening now? Inventory is piling up, dealers are worried, consumers are hesitating, jobs are on the line. In Quebec, with its dense infrastructure, clean hydropower, and EV culture, can't sustain electric vehicle sales without massive subsidies. What chance does rural British Columbia have under zero emissions mandate backed by criminal penalties? And what's happening here in BC? The provincial EV rebate is being paused on May 15th. The federal rebate is already gone. The cost of electricity is rising, and charging infrastructure remains inadequate in many areas, especially those living in strata or apartments. Even with all the subsidies, electric vehicles remain thousands of dollars more expensive than gas-powered cars. Speaker, we must also address the stunning inconsistency in this government's approach to green energy policy. Just weeks ago, the NDP government announced the elimination of 17 cents per litre consumer carbon tax on gasoline and diesel fuel. On one hand, they claim to be fighting climate change. On the other hand, they dropped the very tax they said that was essential to reduce emissions. This move directly contradicts their draconian zero emissions vehicle mandates. Speaker, you cannot have it both ways. You cannot eliminate the carbon tax on fuel and simultaneously criminalize the sale of every vehicle that use fuel. What we are witnessing is not a coherent climate strategy. It is a confused, disorganized, hypocritical patchwork of political decisions driven by optics rather than outcomes. The government has eliminated the consumer carbon tax. The provincial rebate is being paused in a few days, and they insist on enforcing an authoritarian mandate to force British Columbians into vehicles they can no longer afford, justify, or maintain. It is both unfair and irrational. It penalizes working-class people while giving free pass to politically favored industries. This is not leadership. It is ideological confusion wrapped in green branding, enforced with punitive regulation. Imagine telling a struggling family in Mission or Hope that they're legally required to buy an electric vehicle or go without a vehicle at all. Speaker, this is economic insanity wrapped in a green ribbon. That's not fairness, that's not science, that's political optics. We could be helping companies like Edison Motors electrify long-haul trucking, but instead the government is fixated on banning personal cars. The member for Richmond Centre has done us all a favor by bringing forward this legislation. It does not ban electric vehicles. It does not oppose innovation. It simply restores consumer choice. It says to the people of British Columbia, you know your life better than government regulators in Victoria. Let people choose electric vehicles if they want to, not because they're forced to. Let markets innovate without government coercion. Let small businesses like Edison Motors thrive without backroom grant shakedowns. Let common sense replace climate extremism. Speaker, this government has failed to reduce emissions. It has failed to reach its targets, and now, in desperation, it reaches for the hammer. Mandates, fines, and jail time. British Columbians deserve better. They deserve freedom. They deserve real solutions, not ideological dictates. Let us repeal this mandate. Let us pass this bill. Let us stand for consumers' choice, innovation, and the dignity of ordinary working families. Thank you, Honourable Speaker.
Thank you, Member. Recognizing the member for Salmon Arm Shuswap.
Thank you, Speaker. Today I rise in strong support of the Consumer Choice Amendment Act 2025, the Zero Emission Vehicle Repeal Act, which I strongly support. This is a common sense piece of legislation grounded in simple principle. In a free society, consumers should have the right to choose the vehicle that best suits their needs without government intervention. I represent a rural riding, from Falkland to Balaqua, from the logging roads outside Seymour Arm to the farms around Salmon Arm and Armstrong. The message I hear is consistent. We want to do our part, but this mandate doesn't work for us. Let me give you a real-life example. A contractor in Enderby recently looked at purchasing an electric truck. The price tag, $85,000 before taxes. But that is just the beginning. Winter weather cuts the range in half, and there are no charging stations near the forestry roads he travels. For him, this isn't political. This is practical. And the story repeats itself across my riding. Let me give you another example. In Blind Bay, a senior cannot depend on their local transit service, which operates on a limited basis, and not at all on evenings or weekends. For communities like this, owning a personal vehicle isn't a luxury, it's a lifeline, and it's a safety issue. What if a mother in Seymour Arm needs to get her child to the nearest emergency room at Shuswap Lake General Hospital? A 90-minute drive on unplowed roads, often unplowed in the winter. Even worse, if the emergency room is closed, it's a 90-minute drive, and that's if it's not closed. In that moment, she's not thinking about emissions. She's thinking about whether or not her vehicle will get her there in the snow and whether she'll make it there on time. That's what the real world looks like in the interior. Speaker, this concern is not isolated. Even the New Car Dealers Association of BC is raising alarms. Their CEO, Blair Quayle, described the current mandate as a freight train of pain, headed straight for BC consumers, and he's absolutely right. The demand for EVs simply isn't keeping pace with forced government quotas, according to their own data. Only 22% of new car buyers are choosing zero-emission vehicles. That means 78%, the overwhelming majority, are still purchasing gas or diesel vehicles. And that was before the elimination of the rebates. Not because they're against progress, not because they don't care about the environment, but because they need vehicles that actually work. In cold winters, over long distances, on farms, in remote areas, and in jobs that demand reliability. Our own family owns an EV. It works for us some of the time, and I certainly find it helpful to still have a choice, and that's the point, choice. The other issue I find, even with our own EV, is that since we've had the EV, electricity prices seem to be rising and rising and rising. Oftentimes, I often complain that we're sitting waiting for a charging station. That's if we can find one. And until there's infrastructure, it's absolutely crazy to move in this direction. But what's the government's solution? Penalize the manufacturer, cut supply, and let prices rise. Mr. Quayle said some of the automakers have already warned their BC dealers to expect fewer internal combustion vehicles this year, not due to supply chain issues, but because of looming fines. There aren't enough EV buyers to meet the quota. Manufacturers will simply stop sending gas-powered vehicles here. The result? Scarcity. And we all know what happens then. Prices, both new and used, spike, just like they did during the pandemic. And who suffers most? Not the bureaucrats here in Victoria. It's the snowplow operator in Canoe. It's the young couple in Sickmoose trying to afford their first vehicle. It's the orchardist near Armstrong who needs a reliable truck today, not promises about infrastructure tomorrow. This bill repeals the 2035 ban on the sale of new internal combustion engine vehicles, a ban that disregards whether electric alternatives are practical, affordable, or even available across the province. It also removes the extreme penalties attached to that mandate, up to $500,000 in fines and even 6 months in jail for selling a gas-powered car after that date. Let that sink in. The government has made it a criminal offense to sell a new vehicle that most British Columbians still rely on each and every day. Speaker, that isn't just bad economics. That's bad politics. It sends a message to rural British Columbians that their lives don't matter. They must conform or be punished. That ideology takes precedence over affordability, practicality, and certainly regional fairness. And here's the irony. We do want more EVs, but the way to get there is by building demand, not by banning everything else. As Mr. Quayle rightly said, the province should focus on expanding EV rebates, investing in charging infrastructure, and helping British Columbians understand where and how EVs work best. Like I said, there are on occasions, I love using our EV, and there are on occasions where it's not practical. That's how you build trust, and that's how you build adoption. If electric vehicles are truly better, let them win on their own merits. Give people options, improve affordability. Show them that EVs can work for their lives. Don't criminalize them for sticking with what works for them right now. Speaker, the government claims this mandate is about leadership, but leadership without listening isn't leadership. That's arrogance. The families I represent aren't criminals. They're just trying to keep their lives afloat in a province where everything, groceries, housing, fuel, is getting more and more expensive. So let me be crystal clear about what this bill does. It removes the 2035 ban on gas-powered vehicle sales. It repeals the outrageous fines and the potential jail time. It doesn't ban EVs. And most importantly, it restores consumer choice, the foundation of a free and fair economy. If you want to drive an electric, this bill doesn't stop you. What it does, it protects your right to choose, not for what the government says you must drive. In a free and democratic society, competition and innovation thrive. Let markets compete. Let people decide. And let's respect the real-world conditions of British Columbians, not punish them for being practical. Speaker, British Columbians are not children. They don't need to be parented into making the right vehicle choice. They need options. They need affordability. They need infrastructure. And above all, they need respect. I urge all members of this House, rural, urban, left, or right, to support this bill. Let's send a clear message. We trust the people we serve. We support affordability, and we will stand for common sense. Thank you.
Thank you, member. Recognizing the member for Peace River South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I'd like to start by echoing the welcome back from my colleagues. I'm sure every other member in this place of honor would share in my comment that my heart is torn for the Filipino community, and I'd very much like to thank you for your service. Welcome back. I'd like to start with a few comments around addressing some of the things that have been said here this morning during debate. For those of you that may or may not be aware of where Peace River South is, for the last 30-odd years, maybe perhaps even a little more, I've lived and worked near mile zero of the Alaska Highway. And I can assure you that I've seen a very great portion of the Alaska Highway through my work career. That area that I live and work in, again, for over 30 years, there is not a single winter that I can recall ever that it has not reached at least minus 40 degrees Celsius. The dismissal, perhaps, I could say, of the safety concerns around the EVs is of concern to me. Even with gas-powered vehicles, when I would go to work, we would carry extra fuel. It is life or death. And without that opportunity to get home safely or to be able to provide the level of warmth or a safe place is something that is unimaginable to me. I own a company, and I do send young employees out into the field, or I did before I took on this honourable position. And it would concern me gravely to send them into peril without an emergency escape. And in my mind, that is what this is representing. That being said, I'll get into the speech, and I'm not against electric vehicles. I would say that those that have spent more than 5 or 10 minutes with me will realize very quickly that I am a car guy and that I am somebody that loves power and I love turbos and I love everything. And I see the potential. I absolutely do. I've test driven some very powerful electric vehicles, and I adore them. I do. I don't own one because I live in an area that gets to -40, and perhaps someday I will, and I look forward to perhaps one day doing it. But that's going to be the crux of the speech, is that, in my very humble opinion, that should be my choice when to purchase that vehicle and how to utilize it. My very firm belief as a person of science is that the science is not yet there. I look forward to it getting there. That being said, I'd like to express my strong support of the Consumer Choice Zero Emissions Vehicle Amendment Act 2025. I believe this is a timely and necessary correction to a policy that has overreached, overpromised, and overlooked the lived realities of British Columbians. Let me be clear, as I've stated previously, this is not a speech against electric vehicles. I very much look forward to owning one day. Zero-emission vehicles are a remarkable advancement. There's no question. The technology behind them, what's gone into them, how far they've come in such a short period of time, it's remarkable. And again, as an engineer with a very strong science background, I love that. I very much care for it. And electric vehicles have proven to be an excellent choice for many British Columbians. In fact, according to the government's own figures, 22% of vehicle buyers in this province have chosen a zero-emission vehicle. That number alone shows us something important. It shows us that the free market can and does work when people are empowered with information and options. I celebrate those who have chosen electric vehicles. But I stand firmly against forcing that choice on everyone, regardless of circumstance. And I think I hopefully did a reasonable job of illustrating that at the beginning, why this vehicle does not work for me. I actually will add to that, without using any particular information, but to identify individuals. I will say that during the campaign, I spoke with a green energy supplier who does have an electric F-150. They flat out refused to use it in the wintertime because it did not have enough range to get to the nearest hospital, and therefore was a safety concern for their staff. That is a true story. This amendment is not about rolling back environmental progress. It's about restoring freedom, fairness, and common sense. The existing Zero Emissions Vehicle Act mandates that by 2035, every vehicle sold in BC must be electric. If manufacturers fall short of these targets, as we've heard numerous times, they face fines of $20,000 per gas-powered vehicle sold. Fines, which maybe a lot of us don't realize, fines begin in September, as early as September of this year. So they start to come in on the 26 model years. So I think it's going to push the cost of vehicles higher. And I'm not sure that's something that many of us want to see happen, particularly in light of what's coming along with the issues that we're facing from other areas around pressures on costs. I'm going to say, think about that. This is not a policy. It's a punitive overreach that hits the auto industry, local dealerships, and ultimately the consumer. Now, I already have spoken to this, but let's talk about the North a little bit more. As it appears that some folks, not myself, of course, because I fly home there as often as I can, but the province of British Columbia does not end at Hope. In places like Fort Nelson, Smithers, Dawson Creek, Prince George, I've already talked about this, cold winters and long distances are a fact of life. It was not uncommon during my working time that I would drive 4, 5, 6 hours one way to a job site. EV range, as we've already talked, drops significantly during cold weather. Battery efficiency plummets. I did hear in this House last week about some studies that were suggesting perhaps otherwise, but I can tell you for a fact, living it in real life, that that's not what we're seeing. Charging in sub-zero temperatures takes longer, and some fast charging stations simply don't work well in extreme conditions. That's not an inconvenience, it's a serious safety concern. When temperatures dip below minus 20 degrees Celsius, the average EV can lose up to 40% of its range. And I've talked about the conditions that we face. I believe that I've seen, well in excess of minus 40 plus the wind chill. And I can tell you that's a pretty chilly situation. If you're driving on a remote road in the north, that kind of reduction is not just inconvenient, it is dangerous. You can't afford to miscalculate your range when the next charger might be 200 kilometers away. And let's not forget, when the power goes out in the snowstorm, you don't just lose heat, you lose access to your vehicle if it's not charged. That's a real-world risk that this mandate simply doesn't take into account. Let me offer some on-the-ground numbers that put this government's EV mandate into stark perspective. Take the communities of Dawson Creek, Chetwynd, Tumbler Ridge, and Pouce Coupe, real places in my riding with real people who rely on vehicles that meet the demands of their daily lives, work, and weather. Across these 4 towns, there are currently 1,450 Ford F-150s on the road. These are not luxury vehicles. These are workhorses used by ranchers, oil and gas workers, electricians, mechanics, families, and farmers alike. These are trucks that tow, plow, haul, and need to survive brutal minus 40 winters. Under the current law, by 2030, 90% of those replacements, 707 in Dawson Creek, 298 in Chetwynd, 167 in Tumbler Ridge, and 132 in Pouce Coupe must be electric vehicles. And by 2035, every single replacement must be electric. Now let's compare that to EV adoption in those same communities. In Dawson Creek, there are currently 11 EVs registered, down from 14 in 2022. Chetwynd has 21 registered EVs today, up from 4. Tumbler Ridge has 2 registered EVs. Pouce Coupe has just 1. It's not and I'm running out of time, so I'm going to skip ahead. This amendment is not about moving backwards, it's about moving forward responsibly. It repeals the mandate, not the goal. It allows consumers to choose what's best for them based on their needs, budget, and geography. I believe in technology. I believe in innovation. I also believe in common sense and personal choice. Let's support research into hydrogen, hybrids, and other emerging clean alternatives. This is how we make progress that lasts. Let's pass the Consumer Choice Amendment Act and put BC back on the road to practical, inclusive, and sustainable transportation. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, member. Recognizing the member for Kootenay Rockies.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Just wanted to welcome you back to the House as well. I know that last week was a tough week, and I just want you to know that we all stand with you and with the Filipino community. So, now, Madam Speaker, it's simple. I support this amendment. I support the amendment to repeal the Zero Emissions Vehicle Act. At its core, this isn't just a legislation or policy, it's about choice. Real meaningful choice for everybody who lives in British Columbia. The kind of choice that respects the different circumstances, priorities, and realities that people live with across this province. I can tell you this province is very diverse and lots of our areas are very, very different. Let's be clear, without this amendment, what this actually does, it doesn't ban electric vehicles. We're not saying we need to ban them. It doesn't remove charging stations. It doesn't stop innovation. It doesn't roll back progress on cleaner transportation. What it does, though, is something very important. It restores the ability of individuals, families, and small businesses.
Excuse me, member. I'd like to recognize the member from Esquimalt-Colwood.
My apologies, member. I just request to seek leave.
All those in favor?
To make an introduction, my apologies. Thanks. I just want to introduce in the House Turkey Elementary with their teacher Christopher Purnell. We have 24 grade 4 and 5 students plus 5 teachers, so I just take a moment to welcome them into the House, everyone. Thank you.
Welcome to the House. All right, what this amendment does is something very important. It restores the ability of individuals, families, and small businesses to decide what kind of vehicle works best for them. It's about choice. I'm going to use this as a prime example between the difference between this side and that side. On this side, we're about less government control, more freedom. Where it seems like on that side, it's the opposite. Because, Honourable Speaker, the original mandate that this bill amends doesn't just suggest that people consider buying electric vehicles. It didn't just encourage EV adoption through incentives or education. No, they went much further. It set a deadline after which the sale of a new gas-powered vehicle would no longer be allowed to be done in British Columbia. Then it also makes it illegal with suggested financial penalties and even jail time. Let's call this what it is. This is heavy-handed government control. That's not thoughtful environment leadership. It's top-down central planning. It's deciding for people instead of empowering people to decide for themselves. Honourable Speaker, just so there's no confusion, this is not an anti-EV speech. I think they're great vehicles as well. Same as the member from Peach River South. I'm a car guy. I love power. I love these things. The amount of torque they have is amazing. They're fun. But it doesn't mean that they're the only vehicle that's actually going to work for everybody in British Columbia. They're a good fit for many people, especially those that live in urban areas. With short commutes and access to home chargers. But we need to be honest here. 22% of all vehicle sales in British Columbia were zero-emission vehicles. 22%. That's a significant number. It shows that many British Columbians already made the choice. Honourable Speaker, we can't ignore the other side of that statistic that means that 78% of vehicles and people that bought them didn't choose an EV. That's not a small minority. That's an overwhelming majority. So are we saying that they're wrong? Should they be made to feel guilty or worse? Penalized because their vehicle needs didn't match the one-size-fits-all government target? Let me share a real example from my riding. There's a small business owner in my riding who runs a delivery and logistics company. A few years ago, he invested in vehicle delivery vans. Sorry, electric delivery vans. He did it because he wanted to reduce emissions. He did it because he thought it would save on fuel. And he wanted to position his business for the future. Well, here's what he found. And he had to find this out the hard way. In the winter, when the temperatures drop in the Kootenays, the battery range falls dramatically. In some cases, it drops to less than half of what the manufacturers actually promise. Now, his drivers are refusing to take these vehicles. They won't even drive them. I can't blame him. I mean, if a battery runs out in the middle of a snowy highway with no charging station for miles and no roadside assistance that can bring you a mobile battery, you're stranded. It's not a delivery delay, it's a safety risk. This business owner told me, I tried to do the right thing for the environment, but now I'm losing money and I'm losing the trust of my customers and my employees. That's the reality. It's the one many policymakers in Victoria don't seem to fully grasp. Because in the railroad, outside of the policy papers and the political talking points, people don't need ideology, they need solutions that actually work. Let's talk about the larger picture when it comes to electricity demand. We're being told that the future will be electric. Electric vehicles, electric heat pumps, more housing, more everything. But, Honourable Speaker, BC Hydro has already signaled that we are approaching a serious strain on our power grid already. If we truly plan to electrify all aspects of life in British Columbia, we need an enormous amount of new electricity. Likely the equivalent of building one or two more Site C dams just to keep up. And let's remember, the Site C has taken more than a decade to plan and approve and build. It's cost taxpayers $16 billion and still wasn't finished on time, and it certainly wasn't on budget. We can all agree to that. Now we're supposed to replace that scale of development again and again. With what money? With what timeline? And we only have less than 10 years to get prepared. This is not a plan, this is a fantasy. And pushing forward at full speed without solving the foundational issues is not wisdom, it's foolishness. That's what it is. We haven't even built the infrastructure to support the demand we're already creating. And yet we're telling people what kind of car they can or cannot drive. This is backwards. Let's not overlook rural and remote communities, such as like what I just talked about in my riding in Cranbrook, in the Kootenays. It gets cold. It's minus 25 degrees Celsius in the winter or more. You get stuck on a road somewhere with no cell reception. It's not just a frustrating experience, it's dangerous. It's life-threatening. This is not a policy flaw, this is a public safety issue. Even in more populated areas, we run into barriers such as strata councils that don't allow charging stations, older homes that don't have the electrical capacity. So let's talk about fair and affordable. British Columbians are already struggling to afford the basics: groceries, rent, heating, fuel, and now they have to be told, oh, by the way, your next vehicle must be electric. And that's going to cost you multiple tens of thousands of dollars more than what you have right now. That's not fair. That's not supportive policy, that's pressure. That's top-down command, wrapping it in language of climate action. We cannot ignore the reality that every single lives in the city, not everyone has access to charging, not everyone can wait for 45 minutes for something to charge. And not everyone can afford to upgrade their vehicles now or even in 10 years. And yet the original mandate told them they had no choice. Well, we're here to give them that choice back. Instead of encouraging innovation or offering incentives or giving people time, we saw the policy, that narrative, the path, and said, this is the only acceptable future, get in line or you're out. But there is another way. And, Honourable Speaker, this amendment takes a step in that direction. We don't take EVs off the table, we keep them. There's an option, a strong, supported, and attractive option for those who want them. But we stop pretending that one solution is going to fit every corner of this province. It respects our rural communities, our working families, and our small business owners. And it reminds us that, yes, we can care deeply about the environment without punishing people along the way. Let's pass this amendment, Honourable Speaker. Let's bring back some common sense in this province. Let's show the people of British Columbia that we trust them to make the right decisions for themselves, not controlling them to make them and not telling them what decisions to make. Thank you, Honourable Speaker.
Thank you, Member. The member for Richmond Centre closes debate.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. As we close this very important debate, I want to remind the House that this is not a debate on whether electric vehicles are good or bad. It's about whether the industry has the technology and whether the government has the right plan at the right time with the right tools for the people of British Columbia. We've heard today the Zero Emission Vehicle Mandate Act is flawed, not in intention, but in execution. The government wants to force a one-size-fits-all solution onto the province that is anything but one-size-fits-all. I want to thank the member from the other side for bringing forward the statistic and progress. They might sound exciting, but those very statistics actually shows us that this mandate isn't working. BC might be leading the country, primarily because we enjoy one of the most temperate climates in the Lower Mainland, but even then, we still cannot meet the government's own ZEV target, not the 26% by 2026, not the 90% by 2030, and even your minister cannot promise that in our estimates. And here's the reality. Even after all these aggressive measures this government has taken to push EV adoption, EV sales still dropped it in 2024 from 22.7% in 2023 to 22.4% last year. And that's despite all the federal and provincial incentives still being in place. So thank you to the MLA on the other side for listing your government's efforts, but clearly those efforts aren't even close enough to meet the ambitious targets that your own government has set. And I want to thank the member from the third party for mentioning about the F-150 lighting. I love the F-150. On paper, it does offer 500 kilometers range, but that's in the most ideal condition. Warm weather, no cargo, flat roads, brand new battery. In real world, that's not what you get. In winter, you lose an average 25 to 50% depending on the temperature. Adding towing, you lose another 30% and to 50%. That's mean the 500-kilometer truck will go less than half of that range when towing in the tough BC conditions. And even with that very capable vehicle, it costs over $120,000. And I'm sure most of British Columbians cannot afford that, including myself. As someone who has owned EV for nearly a decade, I would gladly invite any member who is considering EV to experience what it's really like to own and drive one, especially outside of Metro Vancouver and Victoria. Another member mentioned rolling back from science, yet this seems to ignore the actual science and data behind the current EV technology. The science is clear. Range drops in winter is real. Even in Metro Vancouver, our own fellow EV groups, drivers, repeated 20 to 30% of range loss, even in Metro Vancouver. So range loss from towing is real, average to be 25% to 40%. And the difficulty in extinguishing battery fires is also real. And most critically, electricity shortfall is real. And these are all facts. And I welcome any member to come challenge that. And then on the points of infrastructure, the leader of the third party is absolutely right. BC could build the infrastructure, but not under this government. If we truly want every car in BC to be electric, we need the equivalent of 2 to 5 more Site C dams. Are we seeing even one Site C scale project being proposed today? And not to mention the Site C actually started by previous government and took almost a decade to build. And all this government has offered is 9 wind turbines. 9. Even 99 will not come near what is needed to support all electric fleet across the province. So when the members talk about common sense, I will say this. Instead of repeating the service level accomplishment, maybe take a hard look into the real challenges. Better yet, try driving an EV through the interior of BC in the middle of winter, past Prince George, and you will see you will have any concern. So let me summarize. We're not ready. We're far from ready. We're not ready in terms of electricity supply. We're not ready in terms of infrastructure. We're not ready in terms of affordability. We're not ready in terms of technology. We're not ready in terms of safety and emergency preparedness. And we're not ready in terms of public trust and consumer behavior. Even the industry leaders, automakers, dealers, manufacturers are saying the same thing. The mandate is unreal. The infrastructure is insufficient. The demand does not align with what's being required. British Columbians deserve common sense, so I urge both sides of the House to support this bill, to face reality, to be realistic and practical, and to be the true leader who set achievable targets. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Thank you, member. Member, the question is second reading of the bill. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Division has been called, and members has pursuant to Standing Order 25, the division is deferred until 8:30 p.m. today. Government House Leader to move the House to adjourn.
Mr. Speaker, I move this House to now adjourn.
Member, you heard the question to adjourn the House. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. This House stands adjourned until 1:30 p.m. today.